That's everybody.
Yep. Okay.
Wait for the ring.
Yep.
So good evening, everyone, to the September 23rd, 2019 Park Board meeting. On tonight's agenda, we're mostly going to be just talking about the dog park. That's, in fact, the only item on our regular business this evening. But Jeff's got a bit of a visual story to tell later for us. So with that being said, did everybody have an opportunity to read the material that was distributed? The minutes, any comments or questions or corrections on the minutes? If not, can I have someone give me
Motion to accept the minutes.
about for a second, anybody?
I'll second.
Carl second. Everybody in favor of approving minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Minutes are approved. Next item is public comment. Corey, do you want to talk now or later? Up to you.
Later.
Later? Okay. Do you want to talk this evening?
I don't know yet.
Not sure? Okay. We'll give you an opportunity after the dog park presentation. How's that? I assume that's what you're here
Yep.
for. So with that, I guess
Yeah.
we're moving on between you and Jennifer to fill us
Yeah.
in on where we're at.
Yeah, thanks, Brad. I'd be happy to kick it off and then hand it over to Jennifer. So, we had the survey for the dog park out to the community. Got some great response from that survey. That survey closed last Friday. We're still certainly calling through those responses as we sent them out to you. Tonight is really what we're hoping to do is really lead you all in and have a facilitated discussion on the survey results themselves. We're hoping this discussion will certainly help assist us as we plan on pulling together a proposed concept and then sending that back out into the community for feedback. Tonight, and maybe Jennifer, if you want to pull up sort of just a list of, you'll see the topics and some questions that really in a lot of ways follow the survey. And I'll sort of introduce this and then hand it over to Jennifer in terms of what we want to do tonight is sort of take on these questions and these categories one by one and have some discussion on them. The survey, and as you've seen it and as you're looking at the results, sought to do a number of things. In some ways, these categories will sort of follow along in what we sought to do with the survey. With the three concepts, if you recall, we didn't want to turn that into a sense of false choice that someone had to choose between them, but we really wanted to get a sense of scale. What is the community interest in? When I mean scale, sort of the level of intensity that folks are interested in having a dog park in that location. We also wanted to gauge interest and feedback on a variety of amenities that we both sort of wove into a variety of the concepts to see what folks liked and didn't like within the concepts. We also had some specific questions about other amenity types, be it fence type or surfacing. We'll have some conversation about that. We also, in the survey, then sought to get some feedback on community interest around and community capacity around this idea of support for a community build. This, from the get-go, I think as we've highlighted with the dog park, is will be a little different type of project than what we've done with some of our more engineered and designed projects. For example, the community sports field at Central Park, where we took a more of a standard design bid build approach This is different in that we're not intending to take a design all the way to the nth degree, to put together a bid packet, to have a contractor selected and construct this. From the beginning, this has been a project that we've sought to seek community interest and community sweat equity in helping to build this. An analogy I maybe have used before, the city is really good at leveraging its dollars. In most of those design bid build projects, skate park, for example, like I said earlier, the community sports field at Central Park, we've leveraged our city dollars through grants. An amenity such as a dog park, there's not a lot of robust grants out there, large grants to seek. And so our desire for the survey question about community build, and why I'm spending a little time on this before we jump into it, is it's really our desire and our interest to leverage our city investment. We have $200,000 to build this dog park. That $200,000, unlike being leveraged with grants, we feel is going to go farther if it's leveraged with community interest in helping to build it. So that we're spending that money wisely and perhaps buying the materials, but working collectively and managing, putting together a construction plan that looks a little different than a design bid build project, but it's still a construction plan. So this survey sought, and is really, we're at an important point in this project where we really need to identify what is the community energy around that, because as we now work towards a preferred concept and really start working towards a construction plan, that feedback is going to be really critical. And I think as we go through this discussion tonight and we talk next steps, you'll see as we've gotten interest from the community, one of our key next steps is having some follow-up discussion here in early October with those interested community members to really start pulling together a potential construction plan. So look forward to this discussion tonight. We'll sort of, like I said, take these one by one, and again, we're not seeking a recommendation tonight. We're not seeking action tonight. We're really, as this survey just came out last week, really consider this tonight just part of us processing this feedback and helping to shape what the preferred concept is going to look like. So with that, Jen, you want to launch into our first category?
Just a little add-on is the survey results that were shared as part of the park board packet. Those were issued just a few days and few hours before the final survey closed. We received 9 additional responses. However, it did not change any of the overall values or ranking of the project, and we will get those posted up to the city website, the final ones. But just know, in our discussion tonight, there was no notable change in any of the values as far as the summaries that were shared with you. Just kind of as a quick reminder, when we developed these dog park concepts, and through prior conversation we had in the community outreach given, we knew that there would be some pieces and parts within all dog parks that were somewhat consistent, and those would mean a perimeter fence, double gated entrances to allow for dogs to calm down and leashing up, a shy small dog area had been requested, as well as we need a service entrance for truck and vehicles. Also, we need an accessible route to get to the dog park itself. There would be some surfaced areas, trash cans, including poop dispenser cans and bags and all of that good stuff. Benches, but also a drinking fountain. So as we look at these concepts, those were somewhat consistent within all of the concepts, some of those base needs and designs. But then we took kind of varying approaches within the concepts. And just to kind of refresh your memory, we're going to just quickly walk through them. Concept A had the least amount of touch to the site. There would still be a lot of invasives out there. We'd slowly work on those as a community with future volunteer efforts to get that under control. However, we would be able to fully city fund this entire development, which was fencing around the perimeter, around the wetland area, a few logs for sitting on. This did have multiple entry points, which we had heard from some that we liked and didn't. But this is really probably your least developed site.
So Jen, just to piggyback off of that, thanks for mentioning that concept A, in a lot of ways would assume really no community build, no
Correct.
leverage. That leverage topic I was talking about earlier. This would be.
Yep. And that was in the survey, that was part of the discussion narratives and in advance of that. Concept B, the city would supply the materials, but there would have to be a level of community build with this. This does have the perimeter fence, a large surface area, did require a few more trees to be removed, most of which are alders, which are a very common plant, native or non, depending upon who you're talking to. Some are a favorite tree or not. But anyways, there's plenty of them out on site. We'd also have an accessible route. This one did not fence off the wetland. This allowed for some revegetation to help protect it. There's open area, a smaller shy dog area than some of the other concepts, but had a little more integration of trails, did have a drinking fountain, and a paw wash station over by the parking lot area.
Would you say, Jennifer, that this creates this concept has a little bigger sort of open,
Yes.
not open, but
Yes.
a meadow area or?
It would. So this would, obviously clear a lot more of the invasives, remove a few more trees, so you would have some cleared running open areas, visibility within the site to help with the dogs and their owners be able to maneuver and run and play fetch. So yeah, this one is more of a mid-range as far as development. And then concept C was kind of a Cadillac, for lack of a better word. We utilized the existing basketball area for maybe a shelter. People have talked about an area to need to get out of the rain. This would also be a place where you could congregate. There would be a drinking fountain and paw wash station all within a fenced area. So if someone's dog tends to run or likes to shake, this would give up maybe a protected space to do that before you put them in your car. And then there would be, sorry, I lost my little cursor here. You would have your accessible route coming in and more of a gathering entry plaza for both people coming in off of 12th and the parking lot area. This would have a larger surface area than concept B, a few more shelters, which, and also some agility elements. This one shortened the fence a little bit down here at the bottom, just to create a little more cohesive area collectively here. This one would take a lot more community effort to build and construct. So I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, there would still be the fence around the wetland in this one, as well as some revegetation. So this really has a lot more efforts in some of these areas. There's some other revegetation areas that we really seek after as a primary part of this initial development. Again, that would need a high level of community involvement. So,
Hey, Jen, before you move on, when you talk community involvement on B and C, have you done any assessment as to how many hours it would actually take from the community to actually do that?
we've done some, like in concept B, the city could likely provide all the materials, but there is going to have to be an element of, that's still an unknown right now, to be frank. But there is an element and some assumptions we did generally make to be able to say that we could do this with some volunteer effort.
So you'll see this in the next steps. We are planning a meeting with those that have identified interest either in a friends group or through the survey identified they were interested in helping with a community build. We're proposing a meeting October 8th, I believe is the date, to begin to really get a sense of what's the experience, what's the capacity within that group. As I mentioned earlier, that really creating a construction plan sort of goes with, all right, what workforce do we have, and
So what needs to be constructed? The fence?
fence.
It depends.
Yeah, but
Then you have $200,000. Is that the same for all three concepts here? Or
Yes.
are they?
Yep.
So what? How do you have it broken down? How much that? What's paid? What costs that much in A compared to B? Now you said like C is like the Cadillac. Well, that's $200,000 for A and B. I mean, I'm just thinking logically, it's the same cost. So how can that be the Cadillac?
So
What makes it a Cadillac?
So, like for,
it's the most C
C
is
Maybe you think cost usually makes it a Cadillac.
yeah C is the most intensively developed.
So-
Has the most amenities, the most clearing.
So you need more
I
community.
think Carl, great question. We are, and as you see as we go through this conversation, we're not at the point of deciding between A, B, and C. That's really not the purpose tonight. We're not. We're really, and you'll see it through the survey feedback. What we're really trying to gauge from the community, and I think got some good feedback, is what's the level of intensity the community is interested in? What amenities are they most interested in? What's the level of interest of community build? And all of that survey feedback is going to be helpful to create this preferred concept that points us towards, all right, how far can we stretch this money we have to align it with community
build? So
build?
you're kind of saying to actually build it, you don't have the $200,000 doesn't cover the construction part.
So let's back
That's
up
why
a
it has to
second.
be a community.
as part of Concept A, Concept A is part of the narrative that was in the survey. Concept A, which is up there now, this could be all city build with the 200,000.
The
So
fence
we
could be
use
done.
that as our
Fence
base.
can be done by a fence company.
Yep.
You don't, okay. Well,
Yep.
that makes a difference between.
This
how you
this
spend the money.
simple
Yeah.
design, but there's also some trade-offs in there, right?
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
not all the invasives are removed. Some of the open space is not provided. So this is where we're getting to, and when we go to Concept B, now this is where we do start that level of community engagement needed.
Literally, now you have some community that have, and
Yep,
the C's
and
have a lot
now
more community.
with some help, we can
To be the
maybe,
Cadillac, you got to have more involvement.
We save some money on labor with
Right.
fencing, then that money can be invested other ways.
Could I back up? And I think just because I'm newer to the group, maybe, when this dog park was originally budgeted or concepted, was it always budgeted to be $200,000, or was there a change? Or it sort of seems like we're sort of struggling around a new option for community build that caught us off guard. And I'm just kind of curious, was that always the plan, or kind of
Community build.
how did we end up here?
Well, it's a great question. Community build was always part of the concept for a dog park. And really this question came from how do we incorporate a dog park within our existing park system? And how do we make that happen? So it's not something that's caught us off guard. It's how do we incorporate it? How do we gauge what scale this community is interested in doing as we really explore this potential site?
Now with the skateboard park, we got additional funding from donations and stuff like that. I mean, could you do that here? Or,
yeah, so Concept C, part of the narrative was included that.
I mean, instead of having people volunteer their time, people volunteer money.
Good question. As I was saying earlier, the grant money. So the skate park, we got a couple hundred thousand dollars of grant money.
Yeah. No grant for this.
The community donations was under $10,000. So it helped. It helped,
It's
but
helpful.
it's a very different scale. And
I just think about Brian and I putting up a fence compared to some people that know what they're doing, you know. It's
Right.
We may look like we can put up a fence.
To answer Marlene's question a little bit more, when that $200,000 was established, there was really no estimating as to what it would really take. That was actually kind of picked out of the sky a little bit, wasn't it?
I would say it was an educated estimate based upon what we knew at the time. We also didn't know the site
Right.
at that time as well.
Which has a
So
huge-
that has also played into this, as well as community feedback about things that they want, such as shelters, you know, the ability to get out of the elements. So including that as an option, which is why we put it out there for the community to respond to, you know, how much is that really resonating with people? And so we'll get to some of that nitty gritty later, but each of these concepts does require, you know, there's a base with the city, and then each step with B and C required more community build. And option C here would also likely require some fundraising and likely require some phasing, just due to some of the elements. Okay. So from the survey results, and mind you that these didn't change, but like 0.5% from the survey results you saw. Overall, option A was the most desirable option provided. Option B came in at a close second at 34%, and option C, 30%. Conversely, on the least desirable, option C was also the least desirable. So that tells me there's a few things people liked, but overall it was a little more than what the community wanted. Options A, it was 34% the least desirable. So to me, there's some elements with option A people liked, but maybe not enough. And option B seems to be kind of the mid-road where people are happy, but it's also the least desirable, which is also conversely the most favorable, right? If it's also the least desirable. So in these survey results, there's nothing prominent that sticks out because everything's really close together. So I think as we start looking through and having our discussion tonight, we might find there's things that people like about each of the concepts that we're trying to merge into one preferred design that we can then share and say, hey, did we get this right? Have we heard from you? And as Jeff mentioned, we are going to have to further digest some of the feedback that was given, and this is just meant to be conversation, what you've heard and what your thoughts are on the process.
That stat threw me a bit, quite frankly, because I mean, I would have thought that the most desirable would not have ended up being in second place as far as least desirable. And you're speculating that it's because of some amenities that may have triggered that?
Yeah, and so in reading through some of the comments, there's things they like about it, and then maybe one thing they don't like. But when comparing to all of them, you know, there's pros and cons within each response and answer. So I'm going through right now and reading all of those and really highlighting what the essence of each of those remarks were that don't show up in just this overall ranking. And that's what we hope you guys also had some feedback on, is what you saw in the results and what you've heard. And as a board, what you would like to see in here is because you're also part of the steering committee for this.
Yeah. Asking this both ways gives that opportunity for what the respondent to both share what resonates with them of these three options. What of the three options are they most interested in? But then asking the converse, what are you least interested in? It helps to disseminate sort of strength. What's the strength of you liking? What's the strength of someone disliking? I think looking how close A and B are in terms of most desirable, and this is 180, almost 190. Well, it's now 195 responses.
194, yep.
194 responses. How strong C is in terms of being least desirable. There's some elements of that are did not resonate that well with the community. And the fact that sort of A and B flipped on the least desirable says maybe, and again, as we digest the actual qualitative, the written responses, that'll help us to sort of understand why, but perhaps the A was such a light touch that it doesn't create some of those, I think, amenities that folks might be looking for in a dog park. A place to run your dog and throw a ball and have some social time between dogs. So this, I think, transitions really well into this first sort of question or set of questions, right? As we really try and get a sense of, all right, we're not choosing A, B, and C as if they're actual designs, but, you know, as you maybe spent the weekend looking at some of this feedback or see that data, how do you interpret that level of development, and what do you guys see as maybe a level of development that would be desired for this?
Good. Thanks for clarifying.
Any thoughts, comments?
One of the things I thought was interesting, if you go back just to the numbers.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about 30% of C, which is, you know, the overbuild or the big build, right, being most desirable, it doesn't surprise me then that you would have 34 as least desirable, because you're going to pull the people from C are going to think the least amount is going to be the worst thing, and you're probably going to pull a couple from B. But like it feels to me like the people who want all the bells and whistles are going to really dislike the one that has hardly any bells and whistles, right? So I think that those numbers to me are not surprising at all. Like I would actually expect it to be that way. It's when you get to the middle, you know, the middle isn't least desirable because it's the middle. Like I would actually have been really surprised if the middle was the least desirable because it's in between. So as far as if you cut the data that way, like that to me makes a ton of sense.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
And I was
That's a good way to look at it.
watching the survey results throughout the 3 weeks that it was posted, and they didn't vary much off this relationship the entire time. So I have to tell you, this has been somewhat of a consistent trend in the feedback.
Yeah, middle of the road's never going to be your least desirable from a data perspective.
Pretty tightly bunched as well. Other observations?
So with that, we may want to come back to that. But another question we wanted to kind of chat with you about is how should the wetlands be addressed? In the varying concepts, they're fenced off, and in some they are not. They are vegetated. Both are acceptable options with a wetland of this size and classification.
And can you point out where they are, Jennifer, and just
most
speak
certainly.
to the classification they are? Yeah.
Yep. So I'm showing you in Concept A here. This is a wetland here right next to the parking lot area, as well as there's a depression within this hillside here that also is wetland area. So Concept A has this entire mound being fenced off. Concept B has the low spot, which is an access point, being more densely vegetated as a protection. These wetlands are a Class 4 wetland under 2,500 square feet, so they do not require a buffer as per standard wetlands. They can be vegetated to protect with a boundary. They can be fenced, and they are permitted to be filled, actually, if relocated elsewhere and mitigated for. So, but knowing with that, there is potential risk to some surrounding trees because both of them are within a larger tree canopy. So we may lose a smaller tree like this section in the middle here. This is a heavy stand of birch saplings that are coming up. And there's some more large trees, but there are some smaller trees. But both of these are under the 2,500 square feet, which is the crux between the next classification.
So that classification is coming from where? The state?
The existing conditions report that we had conducted
Watershed Company did
from the watershed company. It was part of the tree canopy assessment.
Right.
It was within that.
But I mean, who sets those guidelines? Is that
It's part of our city code.
Okay. So, I mean, I would think that those guidelines potentially would be different for a dog park than for a standard park, or not? Because I mean, the amount of traffic that this wetland would get with a dog park would be substantially higher than.
So Jennifer, to
Yeah.
be a class 4 wetland, it's an isolated wetland, correct? Or is it, how is it?
It's low functioning is typically
Okay.
what they are. They're not part of a greater wetland complex.
Greater system or complex, right?
They're
So
just some
that-
isolated
Correct.
piece.
Usually due to a depression or natural grades or things like that.
So the one on top, that's more of a grade issue, and
It
then the
is.
second one is
It
more of a
is.
depression issue?
Yeah, but when you're out there at site, it's very notable.
Yeah. Is that one and the bigger one, is that has the mound there as well?
Yes.
Okay.
So this area here is that steep mound. Correct.
Yeah, I don't know that either one's all that big. They're similar size, right?
Yeah,
So
they're
the-
both under the 2,500 square feet.
So again, not seeking a recommendation tonight, but interesting. And as you maybe read through the quantitative responses or qualitative responses, there are some comments as to what to do or not to do with this area. So just curious if you have any thoughts on preferences or how we might want to consider them and again managing the space. We have our city code allows for some flexibility on how to address and work with a class 4 wetland. So
So are you looking at, are they a safety issue, or you don't want people in them, or people can go in them, the dogs can't go in them, or is it a
Just
problem
because
because they
they're-
did, or?
So a wetland doesn't always have standing water.
Right.
It can seasonally. They usually are attributed by the soil content and the high moisture content and high nutrients within the soils, because that's typically how they identify
Is
them.
there wildlife in those small wetlands?
Or just that your dog is going to get so muddy, are you going to want to use it if he's running through a wetlands, right? Like, is that really what we're trying to?
yeah, I don't know
decide
that
here?
we're not necessarily trying to encourage that interaction.
But
No.
that's what I'm trying to figure out, if you want to fence it off, are you doing that to protect the wetlands? Or are you doing that to keep
That
dogs
isn't
from getting
acceptable.
wet?
So that some of the treatment options are fencing it, producing a dense vegetation barrier to help prevent access, and then, there's also filling it. So those are kind of your three major options, which were all part of the feedback received as well.
And filling it, I'll add, filling it is in essence moving it.
It is. It's
Right.
finding a new
Yeah.
home
Well, that's kind of-
or a
yeah,
relocation
yeah.
or mitigating for it, correct.
But probably we don't know if dogs really thrive for wetlands, do we? We don't have a survey on dogs. So.
Well, if it's open, they're gonna go there, I think.
Well, that's what I'm saying, but they might have more of a desire to go for it if it's wet. That's why I was asking if there's any follow there. I mean, I think of, from being where I'm from, wetlands, you might have birds or anything that would draw a dog that would say, hey, I'm gonna go. And if that's what you don't wanna do, I think you fence them, fencing it is what to do then.
Well, I think that even if you did the dense vegetation, it would probably have to be fenced off for some period of time until that vegetation got pretty thick, because otherwise they just get trampled down and be worthless. So, I mean, that's kind of a double whammy there to
Right.
protect it.
Right. Well, and two, I think there's a way to also fence without fencing the entire mound, which we had shown in here. So I think there is a balance between fencing for the protection as well as dealing with some of the grades rather than fencing the entire mound off, which we had proposed.
Is there a cost to move? I'm assuming there's a big cost in moving it. Was that even in the survey to move it? I remember
No, it
fencing
wasn't in
it.
the survey to move it. It was part of the responses that were included. Some people had recommended filling it to allow more usable area within the dog park.
And mitigation would just be to find something else within the city, or would it have to be
It can be on
approximately
site.
close to this?
It can be on site, it can be of greater habitat enhancement in another location, city-owned, so,
It wouldn't have to be within Tibbetts in order.
not necessarily.
In city code, is that replacement is 1 for 1 in
Yes.
terms of the ratio?
Size
Square
wise.
foot. to
Yeah, for
square
this
foot?
size.
The type of fencing, is that different than the fencing that goes
We're
around
getting there.
the whole thing? Or
Yeah. Just
We're
in
getting
relation to the wetlands?
Yeah. It can be, it can be different too.
It can be
Yeah.
not as costly as what the main fencing is. It could be a different kind of fencing that's just suitable enough to keep the dogs out, like barbed wire or something.
Right. Right.
And you said B and C both don't have any wetland fencing, right?
So A has fencing around the entire wetland. Now this lower one down below does not, because that's on the access, so dogs would be on leash there with their
Right.
owner.
Okay. It's outside
Only
the
the
main
interior. Option B had no fencing, just a vegetative barrier on the interior. All options had nothing down here on the wetland. And then this one here has both vegetative and fencing.
Okay.
A hybrid mix.
Yep.
Okay.
So, it's all out there. And this wetland down here did have some enhancement vegetation.
Just
By the
restoration
parking
kind
lot.
of stuff you're talking about?
Huh?
Restoration kind of
Yeah.
stuff?
Yeah.
Also could serve as a buffer, or that
Mhm.
screen, since there would be
Exactly.
access, yep,
Yeah.
right alongside of it.
So any schools of thought? Feedback?
Yeah, I think it should be fenced. Because otherwise, I think it's just gonna get trampled. And I don't know, I think it's just, we'd create a big mess overall, allowing dogs in there during wet times. And I think it would just destroy what wetlands there really is to give access to it.
Okay.
That's my,
Yeah, the other one
that's
is
my personal opinion, anyway.
if you didn't fence it and you had all vegetation, then you find out a year later that doesn't work. Now you have to fence it. Or if you fence part of it and do vegetation and figure out, hey, the fencing works, but the vegetation doesn't work, now you have to fence it all. If you just go with fencing the whole thing, which I agree with, then you don't have to worry about it. It's protected, and
What percent of the park would be fenced off then? You said it was 2,500 square feet. How big is this park itself?
This is it's around 2 acres collectively, so this,
80,000 square, 80.
yeah, I'm trying to think, I want to say, I forget what that area is offhand.
Because I think that's my question. We have a dog park where you fence off what percent of the park? I mean, on this picture, it kind of looks like a lot of the dog park would be a fenced off area.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah,
So then you're kind
it's-
of like, what's the point?
It's about, yeah, I would say it's about a fifth,
That's
square footage wise, yeah.
Both, including both of them you're talking about, or just this one?
Just the one in the center of the dog park.
So we'd spend $200,000 to use 20% less of this area that we decided, basically. It's tough.
Also depends on where that fence would be, correct?
Yeah,
Jennifer,
there's-
you're not, I mean, the
there's
fence
some
could be right
flexibility.
along the edge of, there's not a
Yeah.
buffer requirement for a class 4, right? So that fence could be.
And the fence that's shown is at the base of a mound,
Right.
so to prevent dogs from going up on there. So that's not necessary. We could also just fence a portion of where the lower grades are where dogs would be accessing that. Because some of those hills are very vegetated with blackberries and steep, and dogs aren't going to be getting in there anyways. Because it's pretty dense and thick and steep. So that entire area was just fenced off to keep it out of limits, as shown. Okay, so we'll further explore that fencing option. Thank you. Whoops. So amenity types. What is liked in each of the options, A, B, and C?
the survey's hard to look through in the 121 pages. I'd be curious if you guys
Yeah, it'd be
have,
nice to.
have any sort of themes that you've pulled out yet. I think it's hard
Are you
for
gonna
us to.
spreadsheet that by any chance?
Yeah,
or-
so the data's, one form we get it in is spreadsheet. And we're going through and deciphering some of that, breaking it down now. What I can say is like option C. People are okay with using the basketball court, but they want to know where it's relocated. Some people are, no, don't use it. So we've got the gamut there. Most people are liking an option B, the introduction of paw washing station. Shelters are another thing. People are wanting to be able to get out of the elements. That's not shown in A, it's only shown in C because of a cost. Another theme is open area to play ball. That's one of the things that people didn't like about option A, is it lacked that open and more cleared vegetation area. Number of entrances. So when we go back and we look, this has 4 entrances. There's 2 here from which direction, 1 here and 1 down there. Option C.
When
Concept.
you say down, it's actually
Sorry,
uphill.
uphill.
It's
Sorry.
It's up-
Up
oh.
12, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, but
Just-
north is up. North is up in this concept. So
Yeah.
let's start at A and go back, okay? So A had 4 entrances, 1 with the ADA accessible, 1 up a little steeper grade, and 2 off of 12. We have 1 main entrance here and then 1 entrance off of 12th here. So everyone would really have to come and go out of 1 point of entry.
Does that one have ADA accessible?
Yes, all of them would have an accessible route. Permitting is going to require that of us.
But nothing out of the parking lot from there? That's
Huh?
all coming, you'd actually have to go over onto the sidewalk to get in?
No, it has
No,
a
there's an
zigzag.
ADA ramp right here that we would be coming in off of, and we'd do a zigzag to get up here.
I'm not sure having the 12th entrance down the hill there is really of much value. There's
Right.
neighbors, the apartments or condos, whatever they are, here, and then the whole neighborhood here.
Mhm.
I guess there is that Inniswood
Yep.
entrance. So you might get some people coming through there, but that's a harder crossing to make as a pedestrian because it's a steep hill.
Right.
I think the majority of the people from the neighborhoods are going to be coming in
Yeah.
about where it says
Further up.
replant with.
And that's where option C reintroduces another entrance a little further up here. We still have this one at Inniswood, and then down here.
So entrances as an amenity, I think what we're seeing, and again, as we're evaluating, is I think there was more support for multiple
Yes.
entry points. How
Yes.
do we recognize that people will be accessing this from multiple locations, both neighborhood
Mhm.
and parking lot?
Well, and that's nice too. The more entrances you end up with, hopefully people are walking their dogs there. You limit the entrances, then people are going to be more apt to drive and fill up that already full parking lot.
Kind of building upon that, one thing we did also here is people like the plaza areas as a sense of gathering for the parents to get together and talk. Oftentimes you see that at dog parks where the adults will meet up and while the dogs are still off and playing. So,
One thing to
And-
watch with that, with option A, just
yep.
you don't have a big open space, at least my experience has been in parks like this, you're more following your dog around.
Right.
You're not just hanging out, so what you wouldn't want to do is do a shelter and option A, right? Because it's not that kind of dog park then.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have room to do both, like to have an area where people can gather and the dogs can play socially, but also to be able to take
Walk
your
off
dog
leash on the trail.
Take it for a walk.
and maybe do both types of activities in one visit.
And the only place for a shelter is using the basketball court?
No. So in concept C, that was one option, is putting it one there. There's also one in the Shy Dog area, and there's one up here as well along 12th. So
More
there were
in relation
3.
to what would be sort of a meadow area or that
Yep.
open field area.
I think from the things that I've heard and then also some of my own perspectives, said for the agility elements, rather than spend the money on things that maybe only a minority of dogs would use, you know, maybe that could be just some logs or
Yep.
something that you know, dog will find a way to run and jump over it, and then we can spend the money to, you know, protect the wetland. Or, and then the other one is a couple of people voiced concern about the using of the basketball court.
Mhm.
That, I mean, and I see, you know, I never use it myself, but I see people there all the time.
All the time, and it's always busy.
Yeah, we'd want to be really careful. And again, as we put that as, you know, and these concepts, again, weren't intended to be this,
Right.
the concepts were intended to give ideas. And let's understand, boy, there's some real trade-offs we need to consider before jumping into it.
That is a big park if the basketball court gets moved, whatever, if you need to, but
Yeah, and then later.
it's one of the few ones that has, and I know they're different heights, but it's still, you can play both directions. There's not
Right.
very many that you can do that on.
Yep.
One of the other comments that I did read out the 100 and something pages was concern about congestion at the sidewalks. And so, you know, these entries are great, maybe just as a more of a detailed thing, just spurred now, but if we could widen the openings a bit so that there'd be almost like a little bit of a lingering area or gathering area or meeting area, but off the sidewalk so that,
So just to give you an idea of scale, this is 20 by 20.
right,
So these are like 10-foot entrances. I think this one was 10 by 20 here.
I
and
think
so
what I
about
hear you saying is set it back.
before you
And,
go in a
that-
little bit,
that-
yeah, so that
So you're not having to line up on the
Sidewalk.
sidewalk?
or people gathering with the dogs, and then
Yep.
because I also see a lot of people walking up there. I mean, this is a great thing, but with their groceries
Yep.
and more people doing it, and they don't really want to get tangled in a leash.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, there's other sidewalk users. The sidewalk shouldn't be considered the plaza or the entry.
Right.
Yep, that's a good point.
And it's just, you know, like a little bit of a widening of the area there or something.
Paw wash stations, again, were favorable. A lot of people like that idea, being able to rinse paws off before they load up in the car. Also, drinking fountains. Some of these multiple drinking fountains were identified. Like Concept B has one right near point of ingress egress on the interior, and also option, let's go back to A, had one just on the, as you're coming and going from the dog park down here at the parking lot. This one was on the interior, and then there were a couple of them in this one. There was one inside this entry as well as this entry. Any thoughts?
Talked about staging a little bit. Is that something that the park could be set up and opened, and then some of these things added over time as they're needed in order to get it operating without having to spend a lot of time dealing with finding money or community support to finish it off?
Well, certainly in terms of like shelters and that kind of thing, which are pretty pricey, I mean, those could certainly be phased, yeah. It's the essence of it.
Yeah,
I know
plan
there's a-
the
But
location
it's,
for
but
it.
it's also planning the location, knowing it's a long-term plan, but also being able to meet those immediate needs, which, yeah, we're gonna need a drinking fountain when we open up, you know, that's one thing we've heard we really would need to provide users.
Strongly desired.
I would guess when
So-
people who, and I'd be curious in the comments, people who disliked C, was it mostly around the fact that they didn't think we'd get the volunteers or the money to do it, or do they actually dislike the design of C?
There was, it's interesting, the comments, some people just really liked it, and some people thought it was too much, and they wanted to get back to the essence of where this is about the dogs running, not so much about the people gathering there and being at the place. So it's finding that sweet spot between, okay, maybe that's too many shelters, right, in option C here. maybe that's too much. Maybe we have one strategically placed one instead of 3 options, right? And still meet that need that people are mentioning in A and B, but maybe C just had too much of. So I think C was a little over the top in getting away from the essence of what a dog park needs to be.
It was good, again, the intent of having a spread of intensity, and I think the agility course was mentioned before, and I think as you read through, you'll see, I think a number of comments, though there was support, I think your comment earlier, Chris, is spot on. You know, an amenity like that will be used by some percent, but it's probably a relatively small percent, and so does that investment really make sense for a majority of dog users? And so I think combine some of that, some of those additive amenities might have been why, that feels a little too hard or too heavy of a touch.
Well, maybe certainly at first. I mean, once it gets up and running, and as the friends group gets formed and get more opinions, if that's something that wanted to add later, that could be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah, certainly.
Yep, that's a very, very real possibility. Yep, let it be organic.
One other comment I wanted to kind of get your feedback on was the size of the shy small dog area. One thing we've heard is there is a definite need for that for both the smaller dogs, but as well as older dogs or larger dogs that may be super shy. Some of the comments are varied as far as the size of the shy dog area. So I would like you to take a look at these and see what kind of seems to fit, and we'll also get dig a little deeper into the feedback received. So concept A is kind of connected by the 2 entry points and has a fair size square footage, but it's not a long running area. This has a smaller but rectangular shaped shy dog area, and concept C has a more elongated, almost acting as a buffer along 12th Street there.
Can you run the cursor on this to show where you're talking about?
Sorry, right here.
See, right there, longer.
See, here's the fence.
Okay.
So it would,
And then in A, where was it?
Wedged into the corner.
right here.
Or that brown section?
Yep.
Okay.
Is there any guidance on that kind of stuff? Like
It's a great-
American Kennel Association? I don't know. Somebody.
The safety issue, right? That you,
Well,
at least I see in the Highlands, they don't use it, and then you have little dogs that are, I don't know, like I think it's good both for the big dogs and the little dogs to have them.
It is, and so providing just that right square footage between
If you make
being
it
able
too
to
small, then the
exercise
small
and-
dog people don't want to use it,
Right.
right? But then it creates havoc for both the big dogs and the little dogs. It's
Yeah,
too small.
I don't know that there's a national association recommendation. I don't think it's gotten to that point.
Well, I was
But-
hoping because we can make present opinions about benches and shelters, but trying to get into the psychology of dogs might be a little beyond.
Well,
that.
that's
No,
where
no,
I
I
would,
appreciate, and I think.
I would look heavily at the comment section there to extrapolate these people that have dogs that are using these. That's where the input should be coming
And
from.
part of the reason I asked is it's mentioned in all various sized, in each of the options, yays and nays. So,
I think the other resource that we'll really want to rely on for this is the community comments, but also, though there's not a national standard where I was going with that, I think we can learn from our colleagues in other cities, and I think there's still an ongoing discussion of some have made shy small dog areas so big that it's really the least utilized space in the dog park, so you want to be careful not to be too big. Sizing is really, really important, and I think we can at least try and learn from some of the dog parks around us. Is there a sweet spot, right? How do we give enough space to it, but not so much space that it's not performing the degree it should?
But it's adjustable, right? So it's
Adjustable?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're
You
right.
can
It's a
move the fence and
fence.
make it
Just
bigger.
fence.
It's an inner fence, yeah.
I've seen some places where the main entry point is like that's your small dog. It's where they all conjugate, and then if they want to leave leave and go out into the bigger area, they can. If they don't, they stay in that area like a holding tank, you know, where the main entrance is. And if the dogs aren't comfortable
Well, that's
going
how
out, they would stay. You had the one by the entrance there.
Yeah, so that's kind of how some of these entries are. You know, like you could come in here and you could go to the Shy Dog here, or you could go out to the bigger plaza on
And then
this side.
in those concepts,
And same with
it's
this.
a little bit bigger of an area because you bring your dog in, and they have a place to run around in this little holding area. But they might not want to go any further. But it's still big enough for them to do things.
Right.
You know, instead of having just a segregated area that's down off to the side, they gotta walk down past all the big dogs and go over to the small dog thing. You know.
Good feedback.
Yes, we will have trash cans in the service entrance and some of those basic poop bags. That was also one of the comments about having, like in Concept B, a little more open, cleared area, is it's easier for people to keep the park clean. If there's a lot of invasives, dogs can go somewhere and not always be seen for the owner to go pick up. So that's also a benefit to removing some of the invasives and opening up some of this area. Just something I also read in the comments there.
So concept B has on the right-hand side there, that big open area. That's the more of a running area right there. And C has what, like 2 different spots maybe? Yeah, that right there.
And then this side was.
And then A doesn't have any at all. Like you said, there's not really.
Right, it's just mostly trails.
Yeah, there's not really a.
Now, there are some natural open areas out there, but they wouldn't be further developed at this time. Maybe over time they would.
You could. Yeah,
Or with use, they would get cleared as the dogs ran.
Yeah, with this one here you could do.
So back to some of our questions. Anything more as far as amenities? I think we kind of touched on B as far as what should be blended in. So fencing options. May recall in the survey, we spoke of 3 different types of fencing. Let me find it. We talked about chain link fence. We also talked about dimensional lumber with a wire mesh, as well as a split rail fence that had a chain link attached to it. The preference of the community was for split rail and chain link fence. 43% preferred that option. However, 30% also preferred wire mesh and dimensional lumber, while 23% preferred chain link. So with that, as we look at some of our fencing options, some of the comments also said, hey, let's maybe do a nicer fence along 12 and maybe elsewhere do a different type of fence that might be more economical. So as part of that conversation, Beaver Lake Park, Dog Park, if you've gone there, they do dimensional lumber along their main walking trail, and then further back along the wooded areas, they have chain link. With those, there's preferences. There's also maintenance issues and things we need to think of for the longevity. So that's why we're wanting to also get you as park board's feedback as far as what would be wise option to, do we do all the site in one type? Do we maybe look at different types of fencing in different locations?
I think you gotta look at cost to help
It's a
make
cost
a
for each
decision
type,
on that.
you know.
Well, but some of them, I mean, with volunteer effort.
Aesthetics is going to be important on 12 if you're going to want people
Well,
to be happy about this
Yeah,
park.
Clearly.
As somebody who
clearly
lives in the
along
woods,
there.
like if we want our friends in the woods and Inniswood to be happy and not complain about this park constantly, it better look good on 12.
Yeah, seeing it both split rail, chain link, and dimensional lumber with a wire mesh, both, I think are, from the survey, most preferred. I think, and you guys tell us, I would imagine there's a aesthetic that's a little bit
that's the
more
driver, I
sort
think.
of appealing, feels a little more agrarian, right? It just has a nicer look than straight out chain link, right?
Yeah, like those neighborhoods don't even allow chain link in their neighborhood. They're not gonna
Right.
like it right across from them.
Whereas you have a nice dimensional or a split rail with either some sort of the mesh is either whether it's vinyl coated black or whether it's a darker galvanized, it sort of gets lost. But it's certainly needed with a dog park, and so I think some of our thoughts in taking that survey feedback and making sure we stay true and honor that aesthetic, that desire for an aesthetic, as we have those community build conversations to get a sense of what's the community interest and capacity and expertise. To your comment earlier, Carl, about we'd want a team that knows how to build these and make sure we're leading a team that knows how to build these. Seeing what is possible in terms of that fence type.
I think the hard part, just from my perspective, and I'm super excited about the dog park, is the people who are going to be the aesthetic is going to be really important to them are the people who are not going to want to help build it, because they're going to be the people who are already kind of anti the dog park in the first place. To be quite honest, right? So I think that's a hard. I know we're trying to get the community to help with it, and I think that's great if we can get there, but I think we shouldn't kid ourselves. The people who are going to really want and need that really great aesthetic are also going to be some of our people who are wishing that dog park wasn't by them.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I think I put that under the very important category. We need to be a good neighbor, right? We need this public amenity to be wherever it's located, whether it's here or somewhere else. It needs to be a good neighbor and be folded into that neighborhood or that area. And you're right, aesthetic, I think, is a big part of it.
And also our permitting department is likely going to require us to be a good neighbor as well, and in doing that. But if we were to propose an option for fencing, is it safe to say, like maybe along the parking lot area in 12th, use one type of fencing in those more visible areas, and then some of the outlying areas, just litmus test that?
With a question, so with the split rail, that's kind of more the rough hewn almost.
Yes, exactly.
And that has a maintenance issue. Its longevity is
Much more of a
okay. And
maintenance issue.
then with the dimensional, I guess I've seen square dimension or square section, but there's also the round kind of a post and
rail.
Rail, is that what they call
Mhm.
it? And that's more robust, and maybe you could add stuff around it and to it to give it that street front and street appeal or whatever. There was one long comment in there talking about that.
Yes. Okay, well, we'll take that feedback and, again, balancing
Cost,
a number
we need
of
to look at,
things,
we need to look at
exactly.
cost, what the fence is gonna run.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because essentially what you just recommended, potentially maybe half of it could just be chain link.
It could, or the split rail, which, because there's also that trade-off, between maintenance and cost, and you pay a little more up front for lighter costs down the road with maintenance, or finding that really sweet spot between the two. Because that's just equally as a concern as the initial investment cost. So, moving on to surfacing options here real quick. We put forth as part of the survey proposals for wood chips, hog fuel, a sand mix, and others. And surfacing options came back as wood chips with almost 46% response as the preferred surfacing option, with hog fuel at 36%. So almost a 10% difference between the two. And then 10% had the sand mix, and 9% had another idea as far as that. Some had proposed gravel on some of the trails with just maybe bark or sand in the running areas, so on and so forth. So as we look at these various options, whether it be for trail, concept B, larger open area, any further schools of thought, feedback based upon the survey results, where we might want to use surfacing option for, do all of it one thing? Do we want to propose, like in the agility elements, option C, we had proposed perhaps the agility elements, there was a different surfacing in there. Any ideas, thoughts that the park board would like to share? Granted, we still need to dive into the survey responses that came back on top of this initial summary as far as your preferred option. But just wondered if you had any additional schools of thought as we prepare a preferred design.
Well, I would think that trails would perhaps be a need to have something different than the other open space. And I just don't know enough about dog parks, as I don't have a dog, to know whether or not a gravel trail would be a problem or not to maintain. I don't know what other dog parks are using. I'm not, some of the other dog parks don't really have a lot of these paths that this park has, and so I don't know that there's a huge comparison to find.
So Beaver Lake does have a path within their wooded areas, and that's more just native ground. But they're also not on a steeper hillside that we are. So
Right.
it's more of a flat area. So I think that's something we'd want to consider surfacing, just knowing the location of this, and dogs may be running and stopping in these areas. We don't want to create mud and erosion and other situations.
Yeah, along with the survey feedback for this one, looking at neighboring dog parks, regional dog parks within the region, that is another really key variable to where we land on and what we propose. I think we're also just even hearing that question, Brad, and some of what Jennifer said. I think we're leaning towards probably a mix of surfacing. Trying not to create a universal surface within this. So whatever that proposed concept looks like, I think we would probably take advantage of multiple types of surfaces, given what type of use we'd be planning in that area and what the condition, what the soil condition is within that area.
Well, yeah, plus it
Thoughts about that?
helps giving a distinction to the trail too, of having it different. If everything's the same, it's all open space at that point, rather than having a designated pathway. So having it to be something different makes a lot of sense. Just don't know what that item would be. Material.
Yeah. The other variable is economics, right? So how do we look at cost? How do we? This is another amenity or construction element that has the potential of some community labor to help defray the cost or again stretch our dollars as far as we can. So that too would be part of, as we put together this proposed concept and send it back out for a survey, is I think taking that next, all right, here, did we hear you? What do you think of this? And what does that degree of support for community assistance in getting it built really look like?
So like on concept,
Surfacing is
like concept B here, the big area there on the right-hand side, open area, is that just native grass there, or is that?
No, this would,
is
so.
that filled in with something?
Yep, so this would all be surfacing.
That green, that moss color green?
This green out here would be native ground
That would be-
at this point.
concept. Yep.
Yeah, is that what, I don't have a dog either, like Brad said, so, I mean, they prefer the dogs running on the wood chips, not on grass, I mean.
That's what the community said.
Yeah,
Well,
grass
the grass
in
will
a
get
dog park becomes
Muddy.
Mud.
grass
fast.
becomes really difficult to.
Right away.
Yeah.
How about picking up poop on wood chips and compared to picking up on,
Just take a little with you.
I don't know, I don't pick up poop, so,
Yep.
but it might be a little harder to do, I don't know.
Hog fuel maybe stand up better
Grass
on
is
a trail.
Dogs.
Like,
Yeah, they rip it all, yeah.
like you could see wood chips just.
Yeah, wood chips on a trailer. seem
Yeah.
like the right idea to me, like, and I just can't picture it.
Yeah, I
In my
think
mind,
what-
it's the regular ground, but I agree, you have to figure out from people in this climate what
Yeah,
works.
hog fuel, I think what you see is that holds moisture, holds biomass, urine more, right? So in the congregating areas, hog fuel's not
Probably not, no, but
necessarily
maybe on the
preferred,
trails, yeah.
but maybe, right?
When you look around at other dog parks in the area, what do they have for surfacing? Is
All
there-
of those that were listed.
Most of them combinations though, you don't
Yep.
see.
Depends on what the material is underneath it too.
Yes.
A lot of silt, soft stuff.
Like you said, it depends what the ground is.
What the conditions are, yep, no, you're right, Joe. Yep.
And we know right out of the gate, with ever surfacing, after use, it's gonna get compacted, and we're gonna have to come in soon after and do a touch-up.
Surface.
We know that, because that's part of the use and, where in the material it will, compact and start degrading, unless it's sand, so we'll have to come back in and,
Yeah, it's part of the
For
ongoing
touch-ups as part of that
management, where the
ongoing.
high use, where the high use areas are determined or become, right? Managing that surface, resurfacing, that's a reality. This isn't a touch it once and there's an ongoing management element that's really essential.
So what's,
You know
what's,
that
be-
from the Issaquah Highlands, right? So you probably have a perspective on what that's gonna cost already.
so what's being assessed in terms of drainage work that would be needed before you start even doing surfacing? I mean, who would do that? Who assesses that?
it would be part of the permitting process, plan review.
So essentially, the city would govern the drainage that you would need to use to construct it,
If any.
that process?
You're talking about erosion control or?
Partly, yes. And also partly, drainage could be, constructed to the point of keeping some of these open areas drier by actually having better drainage built in the first place. I mean, you look at some of our trail systems even, they're built, without the drainage work that was done, the trails wouldn't exist over time. So, that has to be considered in doing the surfacing. And I just don't know who's considering that.
Some of that is gonna have to be just because of the methodology we're using. We're not doing a full surveyed plan set, engineered drawings, all of that design build. Some of this will have to be site adjusted. Some of it is gonna be notable as part of the design process, like the ADA ramps and stuff like that. There's gonna be some of that hard construction that will be more noticeable and easy to do. But there will be, areas that, maybe get over compacted or get a heavier use than anticipated, and we may have to go back in and adjust those in time. Some of that is just part of the use too, that we'll have to adjust and plan for. Moving on, being smart with time here, sorry we've run over. Just as mentioned, I think we'll jump into the next steps. The full survey results and the concepts will get posted to the city's website, and in early October, given your feedback tonight, thank you very much. We're gonna come up with a preferred design option and send that back out to the community for another couple weeks of comments. Say, hey, did we hear you right? What other input would you like to give us? And then October 8th, we're going to be holding a Friends meeting from 6:30 to 8:30 at the Senior Center. This meeting's two-part, both to build, gear up for a community build, but also start building interest for some long-term stewardship of the site. And then we'll be back to you on October 28th in hopes of maybe getting a park board recommendation as to whether or not we proceed with a dog park at the Tibbetts Valley Park site. Sorry, TVP is Tibbetts Valley Park. That's my.
That's right, that's our shorthand.
Just realized that, sorry.
And we really feel both of these actions, identifying this proposed design option, sending that back out for survey, and then this meeting on the 8th with those that have identified interest as friends will be really important feedback and really important information we can bring back to our conversation on the 28th for this sort of determination. Do we or don't we proceed with the dog park at this proposed location?
I guess my only concern is whether or not October 28th is rushing it for a recommendation. Because we still need to do an analysis of the comments, which hasn't really occurred yet. Need to see what this Friends issue is. I mean, just potentially we can talk about this
That's your call,
separately,
yeah.
but
Or is October 28th the recommendation that we do it at Tibbetts? But we don't know what the concept is. It's just that we decided on Tibbetts being the location.
Yeah, it's your pleasure, and I think you're absolutely right, Brad. That's not an absolute have to, right? I think we're prepared for that further discussion, and whether the park board feels at a point is informed enough to make that decision. Yep. If not, then what additional information is necessary. Again, we went into tonight's discussion and really appreciate this discussion, knowing the survey closed last Friday. This is really a chance to just sort of gauge and help your thoughts and feedback help to further inform what we should pursue in terms of a proposed design option.
yeah, I guess I would feel more comfortable having one more touch before a recommendation. We still need to sort through the comments of the existing survey. You still have another survey coming in October. You've got the Friends group in October. So between those three alone, there's a certain amount of valuable input that's going to be produced that would be really good for the board to actually digest and maybe have some discussion about before really making a final recommendation of it. So that's my 2 cents about that. That there's, and I don't know that
Are you concerned about the site or the design or both, just for my understanding?
Well, both. I mean,
Okay.
I think that in some respects, some of the issues about the site have to be kind of established and preferred by the community that's where they want to go before you then make the decision whether TVP is the place or not. I mean, I don't think you can just say, yeah, let's agree on TVP and then work out all the amenities later. I mean, to me, they're totally joined together, and I think you have to kind of make the decision about them together to some extent.
That's the same. It's good to hear. It's a similar approach that we're taking.
Right. So I don't know. I would just feel more comfortable pushing the recommendation off a month, unless you're not under any real timeline here, are you?
Well, I see it as two different things. Do we want it at Tibbetts, and we decide on that, and then you decide on the concept, because the concept isn't going to happen in a month here. What kind of fence you're going to use and everything, and the cost, and that's going to take a lot longer. But between the three parks that we've been talking about, which park do we want to put this at? That's where I'm looking at. That's the first recommendation. That Tibbetts is that park. Now, next recommendation, it could be 6 months from now, would be the concept of the design. To me, that's two separate things.
That concept isn't going to be taken any 6 months. You're
Well,
planning.
I'm just throwing out numbers. I'm just saying, instead of putting, we're not looking at these concepts at a different park. We're looking at Tibbetts right now. We had other parks we had thought about using.
Right.
But are we still haven't decided that yet? I mean, to me, I think they want to know if we want it at Tibbetts. That's one thing.
Yeah, so earlier this year.
The concept's going to be saying no matter what park you're at. I mean, it's going to be similar.
No, I would correct that and say
I mean, you still have to go through the same process of coming up with what
the
you have.
location greatly influences what the concept is.
Yeah,
So
right.
I would want to correct that in that we went through a site selection process, site evaluation process. Earlier this year, it was decided through that analysis that Tibbetts Valley Park was the site as a park board that you wanted us to explore into a further degree and a further depth. So that's what
So that's
we've
already
been
been-
doing.
we've
That's what
already
we've been
done that
doing.
then, right?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
So, but
That's why
the
when
decision that hasn't been made is, do we or don't we proceed at Tibbetts Valley Park, right? So,
What's the option if you don't proceed? Just don't do it at all?
No,
No,
look at Plan B.
we either look at another option, or we do a further analysis, or we explore a different way to accomplish an off-leash dog park. I think as we talk through that site selection process, incorporating a dog park into parkland the city currently owns, there's not a abundance of flat developable acreage that is not encumbered in some way, shape, or form with either an easement or conservation area that there's not a lot of low-hanging fruit areas, but that's not to say.
We already decided that it's Tibbetts.
We decided this was the
Okay.
preferred site to really make happen. So
Okay, well, then that's finished. There is no Plan B then, really, to me. It's Tibbetts. It's just what's the design of it. What you're showing tonight, you're not.
there's always, there's always a plan B. I would not want this board to feel like it has to be.
Case,
This
something.
isn't an all or nothing. It's not. It's not an all or nothing. So.
One of the things that made Tibbetts attractive was the existing infrastructure, bathrooms, parking lots, that kind of stuff. We haven't really talked about the bathroom facility, for a while. Is there any talk about making that year-round? And what talk has there been about that?
So we've talked about that internally as a team, that if this does become the off-leash dog park, that operationally we would need to look at changing that, right? And what does it look like operationally when this would be open, that we would be transitioning that restroom there at Tibbetts Valley Park to a year-round facility.
Okay.
So we've had that conversation.
And that would be something doable with existing funds, or was that?
We are
phased, or-
still looking at what that involves. Is there
What it
enough
would take.
insulation? Is there enough, how well situated is that restroom currently to be able to become a year-round facility?
Okay.
So,
That's going to eventually have to be happening anyway. With the master plan of that park.
yeah, I think exactly. I think the community's interest and intent and what we're hearing from the master plan and really diversifying the use of Tibbetts Valley
Right.
Park and making that a year-round facility, you're absolutely right.
Right. This just
That will
might
be
spur
a
that
needed
along.
investment, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you for your feedback, everyone.
Appreciate the discussion.
So is that a wrap on that, Jen?
It is.
So this would be a good time to see whether Corey and Connie have some comments? I assume?
Yeah, I was happily on my couch.
You got yanked in here? Did you?
So, survey didn't show the terrain except for in very broad terrain. We all know it's steep, and anything you put on the ground is going to go down because gravity will make it go down. When this first came up in conversation, there was discussion of grading to make flat surfaces, and that was one of the reasons that this got pushed forward as a potential dog park. No one ever imagined that we would just be doing an entirely sloped dog park. This is an entirely sloped dog park. So up in the Issaquah Highlands, they've just changed the dog park and they're fencing off the sloped area that has springs in it because, of course, the dogs love the springs all winter long, and people were saying, wow, our dogs get really muddy, and every time I go to the bark park, I have to go to the dog wash and wash my dog. And so they've gone to the effort of fencing off the entire sloped area and putting wood chips in the flat area. Interestingly, the dogs don't like the wood chips, and so the dogs all go over to the sloped area that isn't entirely fenced off yet, but will be in the winter to play because the wood chips hurt their feet. That's what we all assume at the Bark Park, because it is phenomenal where all the dogs used to be on the top. Now, all the dogs are on the other side of the fence, along with all the people, and you walk in and there's barely anybody in the wood chips. So you go, do dogs like wood chips? Well, eventually they will degrade down to something more like hog fuel, which is more absorbent. I was just at Marymore today in the flat area. Dogs are having a great time, but it's huge and it's flat and they can play and there's some mounds. And it has taken how many years? 20 years of volunteer effort to make Marymore what it is today. I used to go to it before all the wetlands were fenced off and before all the restoration took place at Marymore, and it was far more challenging, even as it is now. Like the bridge over the wetland area at Marymore is starting to fall apart, so when you walk on it, and when my two big dogs go pounding across it, it shudders and you know it's going to break soon and they're going to have to restore it. Which brings us to wetlands, and probably why I'm here. The Parks Department is supposed to be stewards of our critical areas. And to say that a wetland is small, though it's fed by a spring, so you're not going to get rid of the spring in the middle of this park, just like the Bark Park in Issaquah Highlands cannot get rid of their water because it will always burble up in the middle of their park and the dogs will always be muddy. And we all say, wouldn't it have been better to put this park in a different place? Because it will always be wet, just like this site will always, forever and ever be wet because that is its nature. Squawk Mountain puts the pressure on the water and it spills out that hillside because you have till layers. Which brings us to, how do you walk on a sloped property in the winter time with exposed till layers? Now, if you aren't familiar with till is that hard mud layer that turns slickerier than ice in winter, and your feet go out from underneath you, and you fall on your ass, which is always pleasant in a public venue with dogs. I'm here to tell you. I've done it. So I envision going into this park, and what do people do? They always linger near the opening of a dog park. For those of you who don't have dogs, I'm just trying to draw a picture. And people hang out, and then the dogs go do their thing. So there is virtually no flat land to hang out in. And that flat land that there is are the areas where they seep through the till layers and squoosh water toward the wetlands. And this is where people are, in theory, going to be standing, and the water is going to be flowing downhill, and the dogs are going to be scrabbling up and down steep slopes with chips or hog fuel or whatever it is, skidding along with their hockey stops to keep themselves from like bowling for people, which dogs love to bowl for people. I have two that love to bowl for people. So it's going to be wet, it's going to be muddy, just because that is the way it has to be, because that's it makes dogs, water, and anything, and you got mud. So how do you prevent this? It's probably expensive. And I haven't seen, what's our budget? What does it cost for the most minimal of fencing? How much do you add for the less minimal fencing? And then if you don't want to fence your wetlands, you actually have to do a further critical area study to actually delineate exactly where those wetlands are. So we have to pay for the critical area study for that, because that's what the last critical area study said, is if you aren't going to fence using a buffer, then you have to do another critical area study so that we can delineate the wetland. So how much money do you have? How much money are you going to need to make a usable, functional dog park in this place? And to me, that would mean grading, drainage, And you would have to do something somehow about the water, whether you're creating an amenity with that, where you can create a rockery stream or something to get the water plus dog equal mud component out of your design. And without the numbers, and without a much more elaborate design that was presented, I think you are going to have a mud ski hill, which sounds super fun if you're a dog, as long as you have a pond to rinse off at the bottom, but we don't. I am not a fan of this site. I don't think that this site was appropriately portrayed to the public as it went through the process, and even less so in this survey. So I'm I guess, cranky because I'm tired of having to follow up on the Parks Department to make sure that they're adequately protecting our critical areas. And I think that is their job, and I don't want it to be my job. I want it to be their job. And here again is an example where we're just sort of saying, oh, we can do that. It's no big deal. It is a big deal. And it's getting bigger with every year that we continue to intrude upon our critical areas as if it is nothing. So that is what dragged me down off of my couch, happily ensconced, to harp at y'all about this particular park and what I see its reality to be. And thanks for listening.
Thank you, Connie.
I'm going home now.
Enjoy the couch.
Yes, I will.
Corey Christensen. I'd first like to ditto Connie's comments. I don't really know where to start because I think this entire process has been flawed. And part of the problem, if we go back to August of last year, you guys didn't bring up the you build it option to the people that was there. I think that's a major issue because the amount of build here is way more significant than having people be good stewards and teaching other people about picking up poop and like that. I also think that the surveys are horribly flawed. The methodology is just ridiculously poor. The first survey really should have been testing what people thought made up a dog park. In other words, to set the criteria that you're going to build a dog park to. And you pulled a few of those things out, but you have to ask the question specifically. And that's the problem with the last survey, is the questions about amenities are all blurred into these options. And frankly, these options are really hard to understand. When you look at those maps, are the trees there? Are they gone? And then several of the people I talked to that took the survey that have not been to any of the meetings, they think the property's flat. And it's not flat, and that's a horrible flaw in the survey. And the other thing, it's just the classic problem with this type of survey is it leaves you to interpret what people say, and you're interpreting from the comments. You're also sort of herding them to specific answers in these three choices. Now, some of these things, maybe it's okay to interpret, but things like, should there be a small dog park? Should there be a wash station? Should there be, some of these base amenities, you just have to ask people. And so I think that's a significant problem. The other thing that's a problem is that in those options, the question that Marlene asked is exactly the question, is how much usable space is actually left. Most of the dog parks around here, and they're the smaller ones, I'm talking about Beaver Lake, Robbinswood Park in Bellevue, and Luther Burbank, they're in the 2 to 3 acres, but that's 2 to 3 acres of usable space. We're starting out with 2 acres here and subtracting off and down to not very much, and it's steep slope. In that upper bench where you might have some potential to actually play like a normal dog park, how big is that? And then this interpretation of a small dog area being like the size of this room is ridiculous. Most of these parks have a reasonable sized small dog area, and one of the reasons that you see sort of different levels of usage is that only small dogs go in there, but they can go into the big dog area if they want to. And so it's not really fair to make that into a tiny dog area. Excuse me. So in conclusion, I feel like we've been herded into this choice. I think the 8 choices were not sufficient nor adequate, and that we weren't looking at the entirety of the park system. What we were looking at is what the Parks Department was willing to give up. And if we were looking at the entirety of the parks system, we might be looking at changing a master plan, we might be looking at something different, and we might be looking at a dog park or a location for a dog park that might be more suitable going forward for the next 10 or 20 years. I think that some of the things in the survey, that having people vote on fencing wetlands or not, or on field surface, is really unfair, because most people don't really know enough to vote. And when you look at the results of the survey, which I sort of went through and looked at people's results, an awful lot of the results they didn't say anything. They just went and answered a couple of the things because they don't know. The problem there is what they're doing is they're trusting the park board and the park staff to build them a good dog park. And people that have been to dog parks know what a dog park looks like. And this, frankly, does not look like any dog park around here, not even remotely so. And that's going to be a problem, because in the end, when those people show up, they're going to look around and say, what is this? And ultimately, you guys still have to be looking for a positive user experience and to make those people happy. They're trusting you. And so I think that's an important consideration to be thinking. It's not like, you're not selling somebody some old tired used car here, which is what it appears to me that the trajectory is. So in conclusion, I think for these options, we need to see some numbers, some actual cost numbers. We need to see some percentages. In other words, how much of this park space is actually usable. So we need to get down and really figure out if this is a legitimate spot for a dog park or not. My personal opinion, we need to forget this spot and look at other options, because because $200,000 is a lot of money, I think. It's not really enough to build a dog park on this location, but it might be enough somewhere else. Or instead of putting shovels in people's hands, why don't you have them advocate for more money for a dog park? I would rather do that than to go out there and sink fence holes. Thank you.
Thank you, Corey. Well, time to have you do a little chat about some of this.
Yeah. If it's all right,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, can I clarify one thing?
Yes.
And just respond. I appreciate the public comment, and I appreciate you moving it so that Corey and Connie, in this case, can hear the staff report. And I very much appreciate and respect their opinion. I want to make one clarifying comment, though, that I want to make sure it's understood. There is no intent, and has never been an intent by this Parks and Recreation Department to herd you as the park board or herd this community in this process. All the other opinion I respect, but that is entirely inappropriate to suggest that this department or staff are trying to do that. We are trying to do our job. We're trying to incorporate an off-leash dog park somewhere into our system. Whether it's here, we're gonna look under every rock and see what's possible. We're not trying to cloud anybody in or hoodwink anybody into trying to do it here. If it's not here, then doggone it, let's roll up our sleeves and see where it could be. So thanks for letting me share that.
Appreciate that clarification.
All right.
So, that being said, how about some...
Yeah, let's talk director's report. So once a quarter, we try and have a little more depth to the director's report and a little broader quarterly look at what's been going on in the department. Another very busy and productive summer for us in the department. What I want to highlight here in the next 5 or 10 minutes are really some work that maybe is not on our typical agenda in terms of work we've been doing. The focus of this quarterly report will really be some of the work we've been doing in our park operations team and some of our recreation teams this summer. Park Ops has certainly been focused on just general routine maintenance within our parks, not just our parks, but our open space and trails, the building grounds themselves. The park operations team provides maintenance support there, and as we've talked before, street right-of-way landscape is also a responsibility of our team, along with the cemetery grounds. So great work and a lot of infrastructure. Some examples of some projects that we've been doing this spring and summer. Kathy's Trail, which is up in Issaquah Highlands. We had 2 bridges that were in desperate need of replacement. The team did a great job of doing some replacement work, not just rehab, but full replacement of those 2 trails. A couple of smaller projects we did within our park system. Memorial Park is really a great example. We're seeing this throughout many of our playgrounds. Some of the high-use areas, in particular the swings, though the safety surfacing, the wood chips are great and do a terrific job, they move. And often they move quite liberally underneath these swing areas. So we've installed a wear mat under the swings at Memorial Park. We're going to pilot it at several other playgrounds as well. And if this, I think, becomes a workable solution, you'll see us incorporating this throughout some of our other playground areas. I think I've mentioned last year as we went through our capital budget process, we have a lot of our irrigation systems are nearing the end of their useful life. Teams these last 2 years have really been looking at and doing a number of longer term repairs to address some of the aging system, focusing this summer Gilman Boulevard, TVP, the Manor, which is also at TVP, some work within the cemetery as well. Up at Central Park, some of our ongoing maintenance is obviously taking care of our turf fields. Central Park Pad 3, this is our older synthetic turf fields, which we identify as fields 4 and 5. As this turf is nearing the end of its useful life, right now it's planned for replacement in 2021. The team added some of the top dressing, the rubber, onto the turf to continue to extend its life and the safety of that surfacing. They did a great job of doing that this summer. We had a slide, a very popular slide there at Central Park that needed to be replaced that the crew did. That's Corey there giving the thumbs up to one of our testers, one of our product testers. Seemed to work well. Throughout our system, we have to do quite a bit of tree work and are constantly identifying both hazard trees, potential trees that need to be removed. We've taken a 2-pronged approach to our hazard tree work, where we do some of this work with our in-house staff, but we also have an on-call contractor that also assists us in this work. So quite a bit that's really just sort of ongoing behind-the-scenes work that's really important. Another piece of really ongoing behind-the-scenes work is we have a number of illegal dump sites as well as encampments that we are constantly cleaning up throughout our system. Again, we take a 2-pronged approach. Both our staff address these needs and these cleanups. We also have a contractor who we brought on board for some of the larger camps. As we took over Bergsma, there was a really big initial cleanup that needed to be done that the help of a contractor helped us do, as well as some of our bigger sites. We do track the number of hypodermic needles that we collect and remove from our city properties. We're in the several thousands just in this year alone. So it's a very real stewardship challenge for us that we constantly need to address. On the fun side of work, our Front Street properties, maybe you've driven by Front Street lately, but seen really the evolution of sort of this interim use is what we've called it. The Park Ops team has done a great job of working with Shantae on sort of bringing that site to life and what is and has been all along our goal with with this interim activation of the Front Street properties is taking a really light touch and having that begin to feel and function as a park. And I think it's really beginning to take shape. But again, great work by the park ops team. I think if you were to go by that today, the site is looking less and less like 3 separate residential properties, and it's beginning to feel like one connected space. So great work by the team. Swamp Trail Boardwalk. This is our boardwalk up at Tradition Plateau. If you're familiar where this is a boardwalk that is, maybe I shouldn't exaggerate, it's beyond its useful life, and so we have begun a replacement work this year, again through the work of our Park Ops team, and then our Park Ops team really overseeing some contracted work with the Washington Conservation Corps. We've removed all 715 linear feet of the boardwalk, and actually you begin to see some of the replacement has taken shape, and the crew will be coming back in October to finish that boardwalk. So it'll be a great reinvestment up there at the Tradition Plateau. Down at Tibbetts Valley Park, we had some netting that, again, doesn't just magically sustain itself. It was in major need of replacement. This is really plays an important safety role in keeping foul balls away from bystanders. So team did a great work on some replacement there. We look at top dressing and overseeding those athletic field areas annually. Again, that took place just recently there at TVP. Transitioning over to our recreation, some of our recreation teams, the senior center. The picture on the right, on the far right, is Courtney Garcia, our senior center manager. If you haven't had a chance to meet Courtney, she is fantastic and been doing a great job as we've taken over operation of the senior center. King County Councilmember Kathy Lambert is who she's shaking her hands with through the Metro van retirement process. As these vans are retired, they are donated out to willing and well-deserving agencies. We are the recipient. The senior center was the recipient of this nice blue van on the left. Great new vehicle that's going to augment and is already augmenting our larger bus. We're able to take a few more people on some of the more popular trips. We're also able to use this vehicle to getting around with some of our just weekly transportation as opposed to having to use the larger bus. So a great grant application that Courtney sought, and really appreciate Metro's and King County's support in that. Just some of the programs that have been going at the senior center, and again, I would say that this last really 2.5 years of transformation of the senior center, I think we continue to see that senior center and the culture of that senior center taking steps in the positive direction. Programs, whether it's trips, whether it's our weekly transportation, whether it's the example of an event that's up there, Baby Boomer Boot Camp we did recent weekend on a Sunday afternoon where we had 70 people come and learn about a variety of retirement topics. That place continues to be a space that serves our seniors and is continuing to serve them really, really well. So great job by staff. So a few more highlights. The lunch program. If you remember, last year we transitioned from a 2-day-a-week lunch program to now serving lunch 5 days a week. And April was our anniversary of that transition. I think we served just through the summer months roughly 2,300, a little more than 2,300 lunches have been served in those 5-day-a-week operations. So again, food is a great uniter. It's a great way to have people come together and get into community and relationships. Pizza with a Purpose is a fun monthly program that we've done where one of our Mondays, one of our city lunches, we provide pizza and we provide a lively topic. Mayor Pauley was there most recently at the end of August to address senior housing questions. I've gone a handful of times to talk about parks-related topics. We have had folks from community development and economic development there to talk about those topics, and we really sort of lean into the seniors. What city information, what city, what rumors are they hearing that we can help to either dispel or have city staff come and talk about. Last item related to the senior center, some really good news as we've been seeking ways to augment our funding and our resources. We applied for a King County Veteran Seniors and Human Services. Part of the levy, King County were offering grants to senior centers. We pooled together with two of our East Side Senior Centers, the Mount Si Senior Center and the Snow Valley Senior Center at Carnation, pooled our application together, and we're successful in getting $1.6 million operation assistance for the next 4 years. So we will be receiving about $130,000 in next year's budget, and then subsequent funding for 3 years after that to assist in program enhancements and our operational resources and needs. So again, great work by Courtney and the senior center staff there. Part of our athletics team, looking at some of what we've done, adult softball continues to be a popular program with nearly 60 teams playing this spring and summer and into the fall months, just wrapping up here in September. An example of us constantly looking at our programs was the Youth Soccer League. Though at 600 participants, you would say, hey, that's a successful program. That's still going well. That actually represents a bit of a decline that we've been seeing. We did some sort of evaluation, look in the mirror, what's going on with that program, assessment with staff. Whereas when we launched that program several years ago, there was one soccer club in town, the Issaquah Soccer Club, that we partnered with. There are now two soccer clubs, two private soccer clubs that we took the time to talk to both of them individually. Just recently, these last couple of months, have actually brought those soccer clubs together and said, hey, we really think to make this youth soccer league what it needs to be, we want to partner with both of you. There's no turf war here. And both soccer clubs have stepped up and said, yes, absolutely. They want to be part of this partnership. So we're just now going to be launching, as we look at next spring's program, sort of a bit of a reimagined youth spring soccer league where we'll have both support from Issaquah Soccer Club and the Issaquah Football Club, football being the world term for soccer, not to be confused with American football. Also, the athletics team, our gliders track and field program continues to be really, really popular through the spring and summer. Nearly 250 participants in that program. Some fun partnerships we do with other cities, and some fun. I don't know that I'd call them competitions. As more, let's get together and really introduce the kids to what a meet sort of feels like. So great job by the team there. Our sports camps provided another wide variety of sports camps this summer that had nearly 1,000 participants through those camps. At the community center, day camp is a huge undertaking every single summer. Over 1,200 participants once again enjoyed that program. Tremendous partnership we have with the Issaquah School District to make that happen. Another fun program within this program, and you've heard me talk about this before, we employ 25 teens and young adults through day camp alone. When you look at the number of teens we employ, not only through day camps, but our summer sports programs and a variety, in a lot of ways, that teen employment is a program in itself and often represents a first job, really an introduction into the workforce. And we take that really seriously and really see that as an opportunity to teach young teens what leadership looks like and what being a great employee looks like. and what a great employer should look like as they're carving out what they're going to be in the future. And it's been fun to see over the years as those teens become lawyers, medical professionals, a variety of software designers, etc., that they can look back at that first job and say that was more. They learned leadership. They learned a lot of important skills in that. So that can't be underemphasized. As we're doing a program, we've got a really important program happening within it. The Counselor in Training Program is another example of that, where we look at middle schoolers and provide them the opportunity to apply. We had over 66 applicants for this program. Couldn't select them all, but what that Counselor in Training does is it really provides another leadership opportunity for these middle schoolers to shadow a camp counselor. There is a benefit for us, and then more often than not, those counselors in training become counselors in future years. So just a tremendous job by Kathy and the community center team in managing and operating those camps. Some events that we did, Beat the Heat. We actually had some heat to beat this year on that day. Had about 600 people out there on the community center lawn. If you've never seen it or experienced it, please come by next summer. Our partners at Eastside Fire and Rescue come out at the end of Beat the Heat with the truck and hose everybody off. So that middle picture is not a rain squall. That's actually the middle of the lawn as the fire hose is raining down a whole lot of water. Our concerts on the green were a great success this year, and are not without a terrific partnership from David Harris, MC Galore Extraordinaire, and our partners at Kiwanis, who continue to make that just a great set of Tuesday nights. And then our triathlon that really looks at a partnership between the Youth Advisory Board and our community center staff to put that on early summer in June. We had just over 200 kids participate in a fun swimming, biking, running event, both using the pool and the space around the community center for a successful event. And again, a great example of what that Youth Advisory Board is able to do and teaching them what leadership, what managing and putting on an event looks like. So that's all I got as a quick run through of just some examples of what went on this summer by a great group of staff in the department.
Thank you, Jeff, for doing that. I know that's a lot of extra work for you and staff to do that, but I particularly enjoy seeing all the diversification and what your department's involved in. And I think now that we're online, it's especially important quarterly for the community to have an opportunity to see all the different things that you're involved with, so I appreciate it. I really don't have much other than, where's my notes? One thing. Before I mention that, so I made my comments about what I think in terms of timing for the board to make a recommendation about the dog park. What are some of the board's opinions about that? Do you think that you'll be ready in October, or do you want more time?
I agree with you, more time.
More time?
I think in October we'll know. I would put off making a decision now about what we're going to do in October until we get to October. By October it may be clear, and if it's clear, then I don't think we should delay it just because we've been thought now we might not have enough time. I think we should look at it in October and decide either to make a decision or postpone it.
At that time?
Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any reason we have to put in a postponement before we know what we know.
Okay. Other thoughts?
When is Parks Department thinking construction, all things happening, when would you anticipate construction starting?
I think we were anticipating the potential of this year. I think the reality is as we work through this and put together a construction plan, it's likely first quarter next year, maybe kicking something off the tail end of this year, but it would definitely be bleeding into 2020.
And there's no real urgency there, right? I mean, we don't have to do anything if we need to have more time, or if we get just reading that now might have another challenging winter, according to Cliff Mass,
Right.
whatever he may or may not know. So if we needed to wait a little bit, that could happen.
Yeah, there's no forced hard stop or hard decision point.
And that might help with just a little bit of time for decision making, if you know.
The level of permitting, would that not get more serious until the board actually makes a recommendation to go forward, or?
No, it's going to be more based upon, really has nothing to do with the site, because if that's the site, that's the site, and then it's going to be the design on that site. So it's kind of a twofold piece. We need to know what piece of land we're looking at, and we need to know the design before we can take that forward to permitting. And there will potentially be additional changes based upon permitting requirements or needs that haven't been thought out.
So essentially, we do need to make that recommendation step before you take that next step with permitting, basically, which makes sense. Okay. Any other thoughts on timing of?
Well, the only other thing I was going to say is, there has been a demand within the city for a dog park for a long time. So, I mean, as much as we can delay it, think about it, and talk about it too. We don't want to just let it go to miss another year of construction because we didn't have the opportunity. So I think we need to review what the surveys say and look over it real hard. And there's a possibility we can figure it out in October. If we need to delay it, we can delay it. But
Okay. Ruben, any thoughts?
Well, I just have some concerns about the comments that were made today. I don't know if there's a chance to get some feedback from you guys about slope and surfacing materials. I'm not a dog owner, so no, and the only dog parks I've been to have been all totally flat. And the idea of slopes and wetlands, and just to know if there's, maybe we can have some more discussion on that. Again, I don't have a dog, so from that perspective, I don't know. And I'm assuming dogs can run uphill. I don't know, but some of the thoughts were brought up tonight. I think we should look into it a little bit, just get some feedback on it from your perspective, or from other dog owners. Because like I said, I don't have a dog, but I've gone to North Bend, I've gone to Mercer Island, I've gone to Merrimont Park, just 'cause I like to watch everybody else's dogs run around. And I have to admit, they're all pretty flat. Whether a slope makes a big difference or not, I don't know, but it's just something we should maybe talk a little about.
Okay, thanks for that. I think this October 8th meeting might be somewhat enlightening in terms of getting more feedback from people that are really in the midst of it. You agree?
Yeah, I think that Friends meeting would be important, because
Right.
that's where some of these issues might come up, and what's their response to
Right,
it.
right. Okay, thanks for all that. We'll let you know. The only last comment I have is I always like to bring to your attention things that are happening at the state park, and we have something this week. On Thursday, the Friends group at Lakes Manor State Park is having their annual event. Everyone is welcome to join us. It starts at 5:30 on Thursday at the Rotunda. And essentially be talking a little bit about what's been accomplished at the state park this past year, and moving forward what some of the future plans are. So it'd be good to visit that if you can come.
Just to add to that, I've been asked to attend and give an update on the Creek Corridor planning effort, and how we've been talking with state park staff, and how that vision connects right into the
Good.
state park.
Good.
So
It's perfect timing.
I'll be there as well.
And start of a new school year, we haven't heard anything yet from Kathy about, do we have a new youth person? We don't know yet. We'll have to look into that maybe for next time. Okay. Anything else?
Thank you. One question.
Yep.
You want to know how the cemetery open house went? I couldn't get there because I had another meeting that night. I was wondering.
Yeah, no, thank you. Great question. I think it went really, really well. We had the chance to talk through, present so the planning work that we've been doing, the work with Flintoffs, the work that we've been doing around looking at the long-term financial condition of the cemetery fund and how we might want to give that a little healthier outcome or goal. We had the chance to talk through what we have been looking at as staff and with the cemetery board on ways that we can bring create additional revenue opportunities within the existing footprint of the cemetery, as opposed to as opposed to expanding the cemetery footprint. And I think through the feedback we heard from the neighbors, Corey Christensen, who's our public here tonight, was there as well as, and I think we overwhelmingly got some good feedback in terms of this approach that we're taking in creating this additional capacity within the footprint. That's helping us, as I shared at the meeting later this fall. We were thinking it was going to be potentially the 24th, which is tomorrow night. It's not, but we're going to be updating the city council here likely in October of the cemetery planning work and what that means for diversifying our fees, creating some new fees for some of these new type of amenities within the footprint. So we'll be having that conversation with council here in October. But I know, Brian, you were there. I thought it was a very productive meeting, very helpful.
I wonder if there's any progress made or any discussion about the ability to take one's ashes up there, adding the columbarium. I forgot how you pronounce that word, but the place to put one's ashes.
Columbarium?
Columbarium, yeah.
Yes, so one of the concepts we're looking at is creating more capacity for niche space, both columbarium, so sort of individual niche space, also looking at opportunities for what's in the market called a communal niche, where you can house your remains in a more community way. Yes, very much so. That's very much.
So a little
one
spot
of the
for the
options.
park board, basically? Is that what you're talking
We want to stay together for eternity.
That's right. That's right.
Just trying to find ways to attract more talent. That's it.
Yeah, So thanks for asking, Ruben.
Anything else? If not, we're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.